Hey, good morning. It's Patricia Murphy. It's Thursday. This is Seattle Now. You might have noticed extra security at your local pot shop lately, and for good reason. They're getting robbed at an alarming rate.
It's just really scary to go to work and think, well, is it going to happen today?
In a minute, we'll get an explanation of what's behind all this from Leafly's Bruce Barcott. But first, let's get you caught up. Public transit is taking a beating as fewer workers return to their downtown offices. Commute Seattle surveyed more than 4,300 people about it last year. They found that transit ridership fell off significantly, mostly because of the shift to remote work. As of now, a lot of the people who are coming back are driving in. But more than half said they plan to start riding public transit again at least some of the time when the COVID-19 situation cools down. Mackenzie Scott is making good on her promise to give away her wealth. The philanthropist and former Mrs. Bezos announced yesterday she's given away nearly $4 billion. Habitat for Humanity called its donation of $436 million transformational. Planned Parenthood also got $275 million. Scott says she plans to focus her efforts on creating equity and opportunity for underrepresented groups. And if you liked Tuesday's warm weather, you'll be happy to hear we're in for a repeat. The National Weather Service says temperatures will be working their way up to the 60s towards the end of the week. Sun might not always be part of the picture, but Friday looks like the most promising for that. If we wind up getting rain, hey, think of it this way. At least it'll help keep the pollen down. We were going to start this show with some flashy local TV news tape about the robbery at the pot shop we're going to hear from in a minute. But my producer couldn't find any. And it might be because pot shops have been getting robbed so often, there are too many to report on. According to unofficial stats kept by the owner of Uncle Ike's, there have been 70 armed robberies at weed stores across the state in the past 2 months. 2 of those have been at Have a Heart, north of Seattle. Amara Barnes is a bud tender there, and, since mid-February, her store's been robbed not once, but twice. The most recent was last week.
This time, it was a bit more scary for most of the staff. A lot of us were questioning whether or not we were wanting to stay. You know, I've worked there for 4 years without incident, and then to have this happen twice within a short amount of time makes you question if it's worth it to keep showing up, to be potentially terrorized. Now we have implemented security at the store, but it's come at a cost. We've had some shifts cut from bud tenders to actually supplement paying for armed security. And so it's kind of like the industry has provided Washington State with over $500 million in revenue, but they're taking no action to keep this revenue source safe and keep the employees that work there safe. And to be this fearful to go to work to sell pot to grandmas is a bit ridiculous.
Amara was lucky. She wasn't there either time. And her coworkers were lucky too. Last weekend, an employee was killed during a robbery in Tacoma. The reason why this is all happening isn't all that complicated, and we've got Bruce Barcott here to explain. He's senior editor at Leafly and author of Weed the People, The Future of Legal Marijuana in America. Bruce, really good to talk to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I wish it were under better circumstances, but let's talk about this.
Yeah. You know, I visited a pot shop up here in the North End recently and asked them about their experience. And sure enough, the guy behind the counter said, earlier this month, someone had tried to break in an armed robbery. And then he added that he's from East Texas and he carries a weapon and he'd rather be armed and not need it than not be armed and need it. What is going on here?
Yeah, sadly, we are seeing a spate of not just burglaries, but armed robberies in cannabis stores in the Pacific Northwest, and in particular around the Puget Sound region. It's happening for a couple of reasons. There's kind of 3 factors that have come together right now. One of them is that cannabis stores operate on an all-cash basis. They're forced to do so. They don't like it. Customers don't like it. But because federal prohibition remains in place, banks do not like to generally work with local cannabis stores that are fully legal, licensed by the state, But Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Chase, they will not touch any cannabis business. And so because of that, when you can't use a bank, you effectively become a bank because you have to keep that cash on hand. You're paying your vendors in cash. The second factor is the pandemic came along and really closed down a lot of other cash outlets. Like I can't go into a coffee store around Seattle and use cash anymore. They all say no cash. And so non-cannabis businesses that are out there and could be targets of robbery just simply don't have cash anymore on hand. And then the third thing that's come along is essentially the crisis in policing. And with police being reduced in staff and property crimes and robberies fall down on their priority list. And I think, sadly, word has gotten around among the folks who are inclined to commit these crimes that the target of opportunity is out there. And it's a real problem right now.
Yeah. And the reality is there is going to be cash on hand there. Like we talked about, there have been a lot of robberies, and a few dispensaries have even put together like a spreadsheet that lists them all. And sure enough, I found the store up the street from me on that list. How are the stores responding to this situation?
They're trying to protect their employees and their customers as best they can. And that includes adding on extra security, which costs a lot of money. So that's a short-term solution. The longer-term solution involves Congress, and that is tough.
I want to talk about that for a minute. People say there is a fix for this cash problem, but it is stalled in Congress right now, and it's called the Safe Banking Act. What would it do, and why is it stalled?
So the reason that most banks won't handle cannabis accounts is that under federal law, it could be considered a form of money laundering. As a result, most banks don't handle cannabis stores. There's a bill called the Safe Banking Act that directly addresses this. It's been around for a number of years. It has actually passed the House a number of times. It's got bipartisan support in the House. And the Safe Banking Act would basically carve out protections for banks and other financial institutions that wanted to work with legitimate state licensed cannabis companies. And this would allow both, your Wells Fargo, Bank of America to handle accounts and presumably then, Visa and other credit card companies to allow credit to be used. And that's the key, is to allow those debit cards and credit cards to be used and get all that cash out of the stores. Now, why is the Safe Banking Act stalled in Congress? There's a really interesting dynamic going on. The House loves it. Republicans, Democrats love it in the House. They'll pass it every time it comes up. In the Senate, you have both a much older crew of senators on both sides of the aisle. Older politicians tend to be much more difficult to kind of gain a vote or open a mind on this issue. And you also have some progressives on the Democratic side who are actually blocking safe banking because they want full legalization to pass and don't want to sort of blow all the steam of the energy to pass some sort of legalization measure in Congress on banking alone.
They see it as a half measure.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So Cory Booker, the senator from New Jersey, is one of the leading advocates for full legalization. And he famously said last year that he would block safe banking because he doesn't want to just take half measures. He wants a full legalization bill to pass. And a number of people in the legalization movement were on board with that argument. I was one of them. And I think for me, what's going on now in the Puget Sound area, and specifically, when we have a person like Jordan Brown murdered in a store last weekend in Tacoma, for me, the Safe Banking Act becomes the Safe Worker Act, because it's not just the wealthy white guys who are handling the money who are getting hurt. It's everybody else who is actually working on the retail floor right now.
Yeah. What's the update on what's going on in Congress? What happens next?
I think what happens next is that Senator Cory Booker and others who have been skeptical of the Safe Banking Act start to hear from a lot of people, both in the industry and among their colleagues in legal states like Washington, Oregon, California. I think we may see a sort of reemergence of the Safe Banking Act in the coming weeks and months. I think that the environment has changed for that bill.
It certainly is a scary situation for people who work at these retail stores, Bruce Barcott. Really appreciate your time.
It's a tough issue, but thank you for having me. I'm glad we could have this discussion, and maybe we can find some progress on it.
Bruce Barcott is senior editor at Leafly and author of We the People, The Future of Legal Marijuana in America. Thanks for explaining this one.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. Jason Pagano produced today's show. Matt Jorgensen does our theme music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.